Nathan Reeves stood in the marble lobby of Callaway Tower at 8:47 in the morning, wearing a grey work jacket that had seen better winters, holding a folded manila envelope and waiting for someone to notice he was there for a reason. Diane Foster noticed him first. She swept through the revolving doors on a call, phone against her ear, heels clicking a rhythm that said "Don't slow me down." Her eyes passed over Nathan for less than a second. Jacket, jeans, boots with a scuff worn pale at the toe, and filed him under a category she didn't need to think twice about. "Can I help you?" she asked, but she wasn't really asking. She was already turning toward the elevator bank. "I'm here for the 10 o'clock, Nathan said. Diane didn't stop walking. "The service elevator's around the side. Ask for Ramon, he'll sign you in for facilities." "I'm not with facilities." That made her pause, but only briefly, and only with the kind of irritation reserved for people who complicated a schedule she hadn't asked to be complicated. She finally looked at him properly, really looked, and made a decision in under 2 seconds that would follow her for the rest of her career. "Whatever you're selling," she said, "my assistant handles vendor inquiries." "Not me. Not today." She held out a hand, not to shake his, but to gesture him toward the security desk. "They'll help you find where you're supposed to be." Nathan looked at her outstretched hand for a moment. He didn't offer his own. "I know exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said quietly. Diane was already walking away, phone back at her ear, already 3 sentences into her call before the elevator doors closed. She didn't see the security guard glance uncertainly between her retreating back and the man left standing in the lobby. She didn't see Nathan open the manila envelope, check something inside it, and fold it shut again without a trace of anger on his face. Just a tired, familiar patience, the look of a man who had been misjudged in lobbies like this one more times than he could count. He walked to the front desk himself. "Nathan Reeves," he said to the guard. "I have a 10 o'clock with the board." The guard checked the visitor log, and something changed in his posture almost immediately. The practiced neutrality of security work sliding into something closer to alarm. "Mr. Reeves." "Of course. I apologize, sir, I didn't. Let me call up right away." "No rush," Nathan said. "I'll wait." 26 floors above, in a boardroom with a view that cost more per square foot than most people's homes, the Callaway Freight Board of Directors sat around a long walnut table, waiting on one final piece of business before their quarterly session officially opened. "Before we begin," said Walter Sims, the board chairman, a silver-haired man who had known Nathan Reeves for over 15 years, "I want to formally welcome our newest majority stakeholder, joining us as acting executive chairman, effective this morning." A murmur moved through the room. Most of the board had been briefed weeks ago about the acquisition. Reeves Capital Partners had quietly bought up enough shares over the last 18 months to take controlling interest in Callaway's parent holding company. What they hadn't been told was who, exactly, was behind Reeves Capital. "He should be downstairs," Walter said, checking his watch. He insisted on walking the building himself before coming up. Said he wanted to see how it actually runs, not how it looks on a slide. "That's unusual for an incoming chairman," said one of the newer board members. Walter allowed himself a small smile. "You'll understand once you meet him." Diane made it to her office on the 30th floor before her assistant, Marissa, caught up with her, slightly out of breath. "Diane, the board wants you in the room. Now. They said it's urgent." "I have the marketing review at 9, Diane said, already flipping through the folder on her desk. "They said now," Marissa repeated. Walter called himself. Diane frowned. Walter Sims didn't call himself for anything under a crisis. She grabbed her tablet and headed for the elevator, running through possibilities in her head: a lawsuit, a data breach, a client walking, the kind of emergency that could end careers in an afternoon. She didn't think, not even once, about the man in the grey jacket she'd left standing in the lobby 12 minutes earlier. The elevator doors opened onto the 26th floor. She walked into the boardroom already composing her opening line, ready to defend whatever needed defending. The room was full. Every board member was seated. And standing near the head of the table, still holding the same folded manila envelope, still wearing the same grey jacket, was the man from the lobby. "Diane," Walter said, "I'd like you to meet Nathan Reeves, our new executive chairman." The room went very quiet. Diane felt something drop through the floor of her stomach. "We've met," Nathan said, evenly, no anger in his voice, no satisfaction either. Just a plain statement of fact. "Downstairs. About 12 minutes ago." Walter looked between them, sensing something had happened but not yet knowing what. "Is there a problem?" Diane opened her mouth. Nothing useful came out. "No problem," Nathan said. "Just a misunderstanding. I'm sure it happens." He set the manila envelope down on the table, unopened. "Shall we start the meeting?" Diane sat through the next 40 minutes without absorbing a single word. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a lobby scene replayed on a loop, the service elevators around the side, ask for Ramon, while the man she'd said it to sat 4 seats down the table, listening to quarterly numbers with the calm, unreadable attention of someone who had clearly done this 100 times before, just never in a room where anyone recognized his name. At the end of the meeting, as the board filed out, Walter caught her arm gently. "A word, Diane. Before you go." She followed him to the hallway, her stomach still somewhere below her shoes. "I don't know what happened downstairs," Walter said, "and frankly, I don't need the details right now. But I'd start thinking very carefully about how you want to handle whatever comes next. Nathan Reeves doesn't forget things. He also doesn't hold grudges the way you'd expect. Which one of those you get depends entirely on you." Diane looked back through the glass wall of the boardroom, where Nathan Reeves sat alone now, quietly reviewing a folder, in the same scuffed boots he'd been wearing when she told him to use the service entrance. "He's going to fire me," she said quietly. "Maybe," Walter said. "But I wouldn't bet on that being the interesting part of this story." To understand why Nathan Reeves wore the same worn boots into a boardroom that controlled 4,000 jobs, you had to understand where he'd started. He was 17 the first time he walked onto the Callaway loading dock, hired for the overnight shift because his mother needed the extra income after his father's construction accident left the family short. He worked 11-hour nights lifting freight in a warehouse that smelled like diesel and cardboard, went to community college classes during the day on almost no sleep, and told himself over and over that this wasn't going to be forever. He met Claire in his second year on the dock. She worked the scheduling desk, the only person in the building who ever asked him what he was studying instead of just what shift he could cover. They married 3 years later, in a small ceremony neither of their families could afford to make bigger. She gave him the brass wrench keychain the week he got promoted off the floor into logistics software, a joke gift that meant something bigger than either of them said out loud. "You built your way out of here with your hands. Don't forget that when you're behind a desk." He never did. By 30, Nathan had built the routing algorithm that cut Callaway's fuel costs by 19%, saving the company from a near bankruptcy that would have cost thousands of jobs, including, once, nearly his own. Nobody outside a small circle of engineers ever knew his name was behind it. He didn't want it known. He'd seen what happened to people who got loud about what they'd built. They got targets on their backs, or worse, they started believing the applause more than the work. Claire died 11 years later, quickly, from an aneurysm nobody saw coming, on an ordinary Tuesday that ended with Nathan holding a phone in a hospital hallway, listening to a doctor say words he'd remember for the rest of his life. Ethan was 3 months old. Nathan raised his son alone from that point forward, working quietly, investing carefully, building Reeves Capital not as a legacy project but as something steady he could control on the days everything else felt like it was slipping. He never remarried. He never needed the spotlight. He kept the brass wrench on his keyring, and he kept the boots, because some things you don't replace just because you can afford to. At home that evening, Ethan was sprawled across the living room floor with a math worksheet, chewing on the end of a pencil. "How was your meeting?" he asked, not looking up. "Interesting," Nathan said, hanging his jacket by the door. He didn't tell his son the details. Ethan was 8, and the finer points of corporate acquisitions weren't exactly bedtime material. But something in his voice must have carried, because Ethan looked up. "Interesting good or interesting bad?" Nathan considered the question honestly. "Interesting, like I found out something true about a person I just met." "Was it a nice thing or a not nice thing?" "Not especially nice," Nathan admitted. "But it wasn't really about me. It was about how she sees people." Ethan nodded. Satisfied with that answer in the specific way 8-year-olds are satisfied with adult answers they don't fully understand but sense are important anyway. He went back to his worksheet, then paused. Dad, you know that note I put in your pocket this morning? Nathan pulled it out of his jacket, a small folded square of notebook paper. Dad, be brave today written in careful, uneven handwriting. He'd found it while getting dressed, tucked it in without asking, the way Ethan sometimes did on mornings when he sensed his father needed it, though Nathan had never told him why those mornings were harder than others. I still have it, Nathan said. Good, Ethan said, already back to his multiplication. Did it work? Nathan thought about the lobby. About the outstretched hand pointing him toward the service elevator. About standing there, absorbing it without a word, the way he'd absorbed 1,000 small dismissals over the years, each one landing a little differently now that he no longer needed anyone's approval to survive them. Yeah, he said. It worked. Back at Callaway Tower, Diane Foster sat alone in her office long after the building had emptied out, staring at a resignation letter she'd drafted and deleted twice already. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marissa. Everyone's talking about it. Not in a mean way. Just, everyone knows by tomorrow. Diane set the phone face down on her desk and put her head in her hands. She thought about her own beginning, the years she'd spent clawing her way out of regional sales roles where men twice her age assumed she was someone's assistant before they assumed she was in charge. She remembered exactly what it felt like to have someone glance at her and decide, in under 2 seconds, exactly how much attention she deserved. She'd spent 15 years proving that assumption wrong, one boardroom at a time. And this morning, without even registering what she was doing, she had done the exact same thing to someone else. She didn't sleep well that night. Around 2 a.m., she found herself scrolling through Nathan Reeves's public profile. Sparse, almost non-existent, a few filings with the SEC, a short bio on Reeves Capital's website that said almost nothing about the man behind it. No photos of galas. No magazine profiles. Just a name attached to numbers, quietly, for over a decade. She closed her laptop without finding what she was looking for, some easy explanation, some reason to believe this had been a fluke, a bad morning, nothing that reflected who she actually was. She didn't find it, because it wasn't there to find. The next morning, Diane arrived at the office 40 minutes early, dressed the same as always, but moving differently. Slower, more deliberate, like someone walking into a room they weren't sure still belonged to them. Nathan was already there. Not in the executive suite on the 31st floor, where the outgoing chairman's office sat freshly cleared for him. He was on the warehouse floor 2 levels below the lobby, in the same grey jacket, talking quietly to a forklift operator about a bottleneck in the afternoon loading schedule. Diane found him there, unsure whether to approach. Mr. Reeves. He turned. Ms. Foster. I owe you an apology, she said, before she could talk herself out of it. For yesterday. There's no version of what I said that sounds better with context. I made a judgment about you in about 2 seconds, and I was completely wrong, and I'd like the chance to say that directly instead of hiding behind email. Nathan studied her for a moment, not coldly, not warmly either, just with the same unreadable patience he'd shown in the lobby. I appreciate you saying it to my face, he said. That matters more than most people think it does. Does it change anything? Diane asked. About my position here. Nathan was quiet for a moment, glancing back toward the loading dock, the forklifts moving in their careful, practiced rhythm. I haven't decided that yet, he said. But I'll tell you what I have decided. I'm going to spend the next few weeks learning this company from the ground up, the way I always do. You're welcome to walk it with me, if you're willing to see it the way I see it. Or you're welcome to wait in your office for a decision. Your choice tells me more than any apology will. He turned and walked deeper into the warehouse, boots echoing on the concrete, leaving Diane standing at the edge of the floor with a choice she hadn't expected to be handed. Diane chose to walk. It wasn't comfortable. For the first hour, she trailed a half step behind Nathan through sections of the warehouse she hadn't set foot in for years, not since her early days as a regional operations manager, back before she'd climbed high enough that the floor became something she reviewed in reports instead of something she stood on. Nathan moved through it like a man returning to a language he'd never fully forgotten. He asked the loading crew about the new conveyor system, and one of the older workers, a man named Ozzy who'd been there almost as long as Nathan had once worked there himself, laughed and said, "You used to run this section, didn't you? I remember you. Skinny kid, worked doubles." Diane watched Nathan's face carefully. He didn't perform humility. He didn't lean into the moment for effect. He just smiled, briefly, genuinely, and said, "Longest 11-hour nights of my life. You still running the East Dock?" 22 years now, Ozzy said proudly. "Then you know more about what actually breaks around here than half the people upstairs," Nathan said. "I want your honest opinion on something." He spent the next 20 minutes listening, not directing, not correcting, just listening, while Ozzy walked him through 3 inefficiencies that had never once made it into a quarterly report, because nobody with the authority to fix them had ever asked a warehouse worker what was actually going wrong. Diane took out her tablet and started writing notes, not because anyone asked her to, but because she realized, with a small uncomfortable jolt, that she genuinely didn't know the answers Ozzy was giving. "You've been CEO for 3 years, Nathan said quietly, as they walked toward the next section. "How many times have you had a conversation like that one?" Diane didn't answer right away. "Fewer than I should have," she admitted. "That's not a criticism," Nathan said. "It's just data. You run a company on the numbers people hand you. I run mine on the numbers people don't think to hand me, because nobody asked." By mid-afternoon, they'd reached the systems floor, the same floor where, 20 years earlier, a much younger Nathan had built the routing software that had quietly saved the company. He paused at the doorway for a moment, something crossing his face that Diane hadn't seen from him yet. Not pride, exactly. Something closer to memory. "I wrote code in this room for 2 years, he said. "Nobody up top knew my name. I liked it that way, mostly. Being invisible meant nobody was watching me fail before I figured out how to succeed." "Why tell me that now?" Diane asked. Nathan considered the question. "Because I think you assume people like me want to be noticed. That the goal is always the corner office, the name on the building, the handshake in the lobby. Some of us just want the work done right. The rest is noise." Diane felt the comment land exactly where he meant it to, not cruel, but precise, a quiet correction to the entire framework she'd used to size him up in under 2 seconds the day before. "I judged you because you didn't look like power," she said finally. "I've spent my whole career being underestimated the same way, and somehow I still did it to someone else without even noticing." "That's the part that should worry you," Nathan said. "Not that you made a mistake once. That you'd stopped noticing you were capable of making it." They stood in the doorway of the old systems room for a moment longer, neither of them saying anything else, the silence carrying more honesty than either of the last 20 minutes of conversation had. "I have a proposal," Nathan said eventually. "Not a decision about your job. A test, if you're willing to take it seriously. There's a client account that's been quietly deteriorating for 6 months. Holbrook Manufacturing, one of our largest. I want to see how you handle it, from the floor up, not the boardroom down. No spreadsheets. Talk to the people actually running the account. And if I fail the test, then we'll both have learned something true," Nathan said. "Which is more than most executives get the chance to learn before it's too late to matter." That evening, Diane stayed late again, but this time she wasn't drafting a resignation letter. She was reading account logs for Holbrook Manufacturing, 6 months of correspondence she'd never personally reviewed, delegated years ago to a mid-level account manager named Grace Liu, whose warnings, Diane realized with a sinking feeling, had been escalating in urgency for at least the last 3 months without anyone above her taking real action. She found Grace's most recent email, sent 11 days ago, still unanswered. Holbrook's ops director has mentioned 3 times now that they're evaluating other logistics partners. "I don't think this is a negotiating tactic. I think we're going to lose this account if someone senior doesn't step in soon." Diane sat back in her chair, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Not the panic of a crisis, but the quieter, harder discomfort of realizing a crisis had been building in plain sight, visible to anyone who'd actually been looking. She picked up her phone and called Grace directly, at 8:40 at night, something she almost never did. Ms. Foster. Grace answered, surprised. Is everything okay? I read your emails about Holbrook, Diane said. All of them. I should have read them weeks ago. I'm sorry it took this long. There was a pause on the line. That means a lot to hear, Grace said finally. For what it's worth, I didn't think anyone upstairs was listening anymore. I want to fix that, Diane said. Starting tonight. Walk me through everything. Every detail. I want to understand this the way you understand it, not the way a summary slide explains it. For the next hour, Grace walked her through the full picture. A shipping delay that had cascaded into 3 missed deadlines, a support ticket that had been closed prematurely by an overworked junior rep, and a Holbrook operations director who felt, not unreasonably, that Callaway had stopped caring about an account that represented nearly 6% of annual revenue. Can this be saved? Diane asked. Maybe, Grace said. But only if someone senior shows up in person, soon, and actually listens instead of apologizing with a discount. Diane looked at the clock. Nearly 10. She thought about Nathan's test, not a spreadsheet, not a boardroom decision, but a real problem with real people on the other end of it. Book us a flight to Holbrook's headquarters, she said. Tomorrow morning. You're coming with me. And Grace, from here forward, when you flag something like this, it doesn't sit in an inbox for 11 days. I don't care what else is on my calendar. She hung up the phone and sat alone in her office for a long moment, looking out at the city lights, thinking about a man in a grey jacket who had spent a whole day teaching her more about her own company than 3 years of quarterly reviews ever had. Holbrook Manufacturing's headquarters sat 2 states away, a sprawling industrial campus outside a mid-sized city that most executives at Callaway had never bothered to visit in person. Diane and Grace landed at 9 a.m., rented a car, and drove the last 40 minutes in near silence, Diane reviewing notes she'd stayed up half the night preparing. You're nervous, Grace observed. I'm walking into a room to apologize for a problem I didn't know existed until last night, Diane said. I'd be worried if I wasn't nervous. They were met in the lobby by Holbrook's operations director, a stern, exhausted-looking man named Curtis Bell, who did not offer a handshake and did not pretend to be pleased to see them. I have to be honest, Curtis said, leading them back toward a conference room. We already have a meeting scheduled Thursday with your competitor. This felt like the last courtesy call before we make it official. Then I'm glad we came before Thursday, Diane said. For the next 2 hours, Diane did something she hadn't done in longer than she could admit to herself. She stopped explaining and started listening. She let Curtis walk her through 6 months of frustration. Missed windows, a support system that felt like shouting into an empty room, a sense, clearly built up over time, that Callaway saw Holbrook as a line item rather than a partnership. She didn't defend the company. She didn't offer discounts as a first move. She took notes, asked precise follow-up questions, and when Curtis finally ran out of grievances, she said something that visibly surprised him. You're right about all of it, Diane said. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. We failed you, repeatedly, and the fact that it took 6 months and nearly losing your business for someone at my level to hear about it directly is its own failure, on top of the operational ones. Curtis leaned back slightly, some of the defensiveness leaving his posture. I didn't expect that, he admitted. I don't expect it to fix 6 months of frustration by itself, Diane said. But here's what I can offer that isn't a discount. Grace will be your direct point of contact from today forward, with my personal cell number as backup if anything stalls again. We're rebuilding the routing priority for your account this week, and I'll be back here in 30 days, in person, whether things are fixed or not, because I don't think trust gets rebuilt over email. Curtis studied her for a long moment. 30 days, he said. I'll hold you to that. Please do, Diane said. On the flight home, Diane finally allowed herself to exhale. I think we saved it, she said. You saved it, Grace corrected. I've been trying to get someone to take this seriously for months. Diane was quiet for a moment. I owe you a real apology too. Not just for Holbrook. For every warning I let sit in an inbox because I was too buried in slides to read what was actually happening underneath them. Grace looked at her, genuinely surprised by the admission. Can I ask what changed? You've been different the last 2 days. Diane thought about the lobby. The outstretched hand. The service elevator. Someone held up a mirror I didn't want to look into, she said. It's uncomfortable. But I think it might be the most useful thing that's happened to me in years. Back at Callaway Tower, word of the Holbrook trip had already reached the executive floor by the time Diane returned. Nathan found her in her office late that afternoon, still in her travel clothes, reviewing the account notes one more time. I heard you flew out this morning, he said, leaning against the doorframe. 6 months of warnings sitting unread, Diane said, without looking up. That's on me. I fixed what I could fix in one visit. It's not enough to undo the pattern, but it's a start. How did the client respond? Cautiously hopeful, Diane said. I told them I'd be back in 30 days in person, whether it's fixed or not. Nathan nodded slowly, something in his expression harder to read than usual. That's the right instinct, he said. Most executives would have sent a discount and a form email. You went in person, with nothing to offer but honesty. That's not nothing. Diane finally looked up at him. Is this the test? Or is there more? There's always more, Nathan said. But this told me something I needed to know. You're capable of seeing people clearly when you slow down enough to look. The question is whether you'll keep doing it when there isn't a crisis forcing your hand, and whether that includes people who'll never have the leverage to embarrass you into it. The comment landed exactly where he intended, quiet and unmistakable, a callback to the lobby that neither of them needed to say out loud again. I want to ask you something, Diane said. Why didn't you just fire me yesterday? You had every reason to. Most people in your position would have. Nathan was quiet for a moment, considering the question honestly. Because firing you would have solved nothing, he said. You'd have been replaced by someone who might make the exact same mistake, with no reason to ever examine it, because nobody would have called it out. I'd rather build a company full of people who've actually had to look at their own blind spots than one that just quietly cycles through the same mistakes with new names attached. And if I hadn't taken the test seriously, if I'd sat in my office waiting for a verdict instead of walking the floor, then I'd have had my answer a different way, Nathan said simply. But you didn't. So now we have a different conversation to have. That night, Nathan came home to find Ethan waiting at the kitchen table with a new drawing. Not the usual stick figures, but something more careful, a picture of 2 people shaking hands under a sun with a crooked smile drawn into it. What's this one? Nathan asked. You said someone didn't shake your hand, Ethan said. So I drew what I think should have happened instead. Nathan looked at the drawing for a long moment, the careful crayon handshake, the sun, the effort his son had clearly put into getting the fingers right. Can I tell you something? He said, sitting down across from Ethan. I think that might actually happen soon. For real. Really? I think so, Nathan said. But it's going to mean something different than it would have yesterday. It's going to mean she actually earned it. Ethan nodded seriously, the way he did when he sensed something mattered even if he couldn't name exactly why. He slid the drawing across the table. Put it in your pocket, he said. Like the notes. Nathan folded it carefully and did exactly that. The crisis that would test everything came 9 days later, and it had nothing to do with Holbrook Manufacturing. It started with a phone call at 6:15 in the morning. Grace Liu, breathless, calling Diane before either of them had had coffee. There's a fire at the Denton distribution hub, Grace said. Started overnight in the electrical system near the loading bays. Nobody's hurt, but the whole facility's shut down, and Denton handles almost 30% of our West Coast volume. Diane was already pulling on clothes with the phone wedged against her shoulder. How long until it's operational again? Fire marshal says minimum 2 weeks for a full inspection and electrical rebuild. We've got 4 major clients with time-sensitive shipments routing through Denton this week alone, including a first shipment for a new account we spent 8 months courting. Reroute through Fresno, Diane said. Fresno's already running at 94% capacity, Grace said. We can absorb some of it, but not all 30%, not without massive delays across every client, not just Denton's. Diane closed her eyes, standing in her kitchen at 6:20 in the morning, feeling the full weight of a crisis that made the Holbrook problem look small by comparison. This wasn't a relationship that had eroded slowly over 6 months. This was 30% of a coast suddenly with nowhere to go, today, with real trucks and real freight and real client deadlines that didn't care about a fire nobody could have predicted. "Get everyone into the war room in 45 minutes, Diane said. "I'm calling Nathan." Nathan arrived at the office by 7 a.m., still in the same grey jacket, moving with the same unhurried focus Diane had come to recognize over the last week and a half. He didn't take over the meeting. He sat at the end of the table and let Diane run it, watching how she handled real pressure instead of a curated crisis he'd handed her. "We need a full capacity map across every West Coast facility within the hour," Diane said. "Not estimates, real numbers, real constraints. Grace, I want you coordinating directly with each hub manager, not going through regional directors. We don't have time for layers today." "On it," Grace said, already moving. "I want a client communication plan drafted in the next 30 minutes, Diane continued, turning to the head of client relations. "Not corporate boilerplate. Real information, what's affected, what our plan is, when they'll hear from us next. If a client shipment is going to be late, I want them to hear it from us before they hear it from anyone else." The room moved into motion. For the next 6 hours, Diane didn't sit still. She moved between the war room and individual calls, absorbing bad news as it arrived and making decisions in real time instead of waiting for consensus that crises like this one didn't have patience for. By early afternoon, a workable plan had emerged: partial rerouting through Fresno, an emergency short-term lease on warehouse space near Denton to bridge the gap, and a direct call from Diane herself to every major affected client, including the new account they'd spent 8 months courting. That call was the hardest one. The new client, a mid-sized retailer named Corbin Home Goods, had been burned before by a previous logistics partner and had chosen Callaway specifically because they'd promised reliability from day one. "I won't pretend this isn't bad timing," Diane told their operations lead directly. "It's the worst possible week for this to happen, and I understand if it shakes your confidence in us before we've even really started. But I want you to hear directly from me what we're doing, and I want to be completely honest about the parts that are still uncertain." She laid out the plan in full, the honest version, including the parts that weren't fully solved yet, and offered something she hadn't offered Holbrook: a personal commitment to update them daily, not weekly, until the Denton facility was fully operational again. There was a long pause on the line. Most companies would have had a junior account manager make this call, the operations lead said finally. "The fact that you're making it yourself tells me something." "It should," Diane said. "Because if this partnership doesn't work, I want it to be because of something bigger than us not caring enough to show up when it got hard." By evening, the immediate crisis was managed, if not solved. Rerouted trucks were moving. Emergency warehouse space was secured. Every major client had heard directly from Callaway before a single delayed shipment became a surprise. Nathan found Diane in the war room after most of the team had finally gone home, still reviewing capacity numbers on her tablet, exhausted but steady. "You didn't need me today," he said. "I needed you here," Diane said, without looking up. "Even if you didn't say much. Knowing someone was watching who actually understood the stakes, that mattered more than I expected it to. You ran that entire response without waiting for my sign-off on a single decision," Nathan said. 6 days ago, I don't think you would have done that. You'd have waited for consensus, or for someone above you to tell you it was safe to move." Diane set down her tablet. 6 days ago, I don't think I trusted myself to be right without a committee backing me up. I'm not sure exactly when that changed. Maybe it started in a lobby, if I'm being honest about it." Nathan allowed himself a small, tired smile, the first real one she'd seen from him in days. "There's something you should know," he said. "The board's been watching how you handled this today, closely. Not because I asked them to. Because word travels fast when a CEO gets on the phone personally with an anxious new client instead of hiding behind a press release. And I think you're going to hear from Walter tomorrow," Nathan said. "But that's his conversation to have, not mine to preview." Diane felt something tighten in her chest, not fear this time, but something closer to hope, fragile and unfamiliar after the week she'd had. "Can I ask you something honest?" she said. "If today had gone badly, if I'd frozen, or waited for permission, or made the wrong call under pressure, would you have let me go?" Nathan considered the question with the same unhurried honesty he brought to everything. "Probably," he said. "But I don't think it would have gone badly. I think I already knew that, walking in this morning. I just needed you to know it too." The following morning, Diane was summoned to a boardroom for the second time in 2 weeks. But this time, walking down the hallway, she didn't feel the same drop in her stomach she'd felt the first time. Walter Sims met her at the door personally, something he rarely did. "You handled yesterday well," he said, before she'd even sat down. "Better than well. I've been on this board 11 years, and I don't think I've seen a CEO get on the phone personally with an anxious new client during an active crisis instead of routing it through PR. That's not how this company has operated, historically. It should be." Diane sat down, uncertain where this was heading. The rest of the board filed in behind Walter, along with Nathan, who took his usual seat at the head of the table without saying much. "I'll be direct," Walter continued, once everyone was seated. 2 weeks ago, an incident occurred in this building that could have ended your tenure here. Instead, it became the beginning of what several of us are now describing as the most engaged, most present leadership we've seen from you since you took this role. Nathan asked us not to intervene, to let the situation play out and let your actions speak for themselves over these 2 weeks rather than a single apology. We agreed. What we've watched since then has answered the question this board was quietly asking before any of this happened. Whether you were the right person to lead this company forward, or whether we'd need to make a change. Diane felt her pulse in her throat. "And the answer?" "The answer," Walter said, "is that we're prepared to extend your contract another 3 years, with an expanded mandate, full authority to rebuild client relationship processes company-wide, based on exactly the kind of hands-on leadership we watched during the Denton fire and the Holbrook recovery. This board isn't interested in punishing a mistake that's already been corrected. We're interested in supporting a leader who corrected it visibly, in front of the people who needed to see it." Diane sat in stunned silence for a moment. She looked toward Nathan, who met her eyes with the same steady, unreadable calm he'd carried since the moment she first refused to shake his hand. "I owe you something I don't think I can fully repay," she said to him, in front of the entire board, not caring that it wasn't the professional thing to say in a formal session. "You had every reason to remove me the day we met. Instead you gave me 2 weeks to prove I was capable of the thing I'd failed to show you in that lobby." "I didn't give you anything," Nathan said. "I gave you the chance. You're the one who did the work. That distinction matters, and I'd like you to remember it the next time you're deciding what someone else deserves, before you know anything about them." The comment wasn't cruel. It didn't need to be. It landed exactly as precisely as everything else he'd said to her over the last 2 weeks, a lesson delivered without ever raising his voice. Word of the board's decision moved through Callaway Tower by early afternoon, the way news like that always does, not through an official announcement yet, but through the quiet network of assistants and department heads who somehow always know before anyone officially tells them. Grace found Diane in her office late in the day. "I heard," Grace said. "Congratulations." "Don't congratulate me yet," Diane said. "There's something I want to do first, and I want your help doing it right." "What's that?" "I want to hold a company-wide town hall," Diane said. "Not a curated one. I want to tell everyone exactly what happened in that lobby 2 weeks ago, and exactly what I've learned since. Not because Nathan's asking me to. Because I think the people who work here deserve to know their CEO is capable of getting something fundamentally wrong and correcting it in the open, instead of quietly hoping nobody notices." Grace studied her for a moment. "That's a risk. Some people are going to see it as weakness." "Maybe," Diane said. "But I think more of them will see it as honesty." And honestly, after watching people like Ozzy on the loading dock tell Nathan things nobody upstairs had asked in years, I think this company has had enough executives who mistake silence for strength. That evening, Diane called Nathan directly, something she'd never initiated before. "I want to hold a town hall," she said, once he picked up. "Company-wide. I want to talk publicly about what happened in the lobby, and what's changed since. I wanted to ask if that's something you'd support, or something you'd rather keep quiet. There was a pause on the line, and when Nathan spoke again, there was something warmer in his voice than she'd heard from him yet. I think that's the strongest instinct you've had in 2 weeks, he said. Most people in your position would want the story to disappear. You're choosing to make it useful to everyone else instead. That's not weakness, Diane. That's leadership most companies never actually get to see. Will you be there? I'll be there, Nathan said. But it's your story to tell, not mine. I'll only add what needs adding. Diane hung up the phone and sat for a long moment in the quiet of her office, looking out over the city, thinking about how far the last 2 weeks had carried her. From a lobby where she'd refused a stranger's hand without a second thought, to a town hall she was choosing to hold not because anyone forced her, but because she finally understood what it cost the company every time someone like her looked past someone like him. The atrium of Callaway Tower filled with nearly 600 employees by the time the town hall began. Office staff from the upper floors, warehouse workers who'd taken a rare break from the dock to attend, drivers who'd rearranged routes to be there in person. It was the largest gathering the building had seen outside of a holiday party in years. Diane stood at the front without notes, Nathan a few feet to the side, present but not centered, exactly as he'd promised. 2 weeks ago, Diane began, I made a mistake in this building's lobby that I want to talk about directly, instead of letting it become a rumor that gets smaller and less honest every time it's retold. The room quieted. A man came in for a 10 o'clock meeting, dressed simply, and I decided in under 2 seconds, without asking a single question, that he wasn't worth my attention. I told him to use the service elevator. I didn't shake his hand. 20 minutes later, I learned that man was Nathan Reeves, our new executive chairman, someone who started on this company's loading dock at 17 years old and built the routing software that saved this business from bankruptcy before most of you were hired. A murmur moved through the crowd. Nathan stayed still, letting her tell it. I want to be honest about why that happened, Diane continued, because I think it matters more than the apology itself. I judged him by what he was wearing, because somewhere along the way, I'd let looking successful become my shorthand for worth listening to. And I think if I'm honest with myself, and with all of you, that shorthand has cost this company more than just one uncomfortable morning in a lobby. It's cost us relationships with clients we stopped truly listening to. It's cost us warnings from people on this floor, she gestured toward the warehouse workers gathered near the back, that never made it up to my office because somewhere along the way, this company stopped believing the people closest to the work had anything worth reporting upward. She paused, scanning the crowd, finding Ozzy near the back, who gave her a small, surprised nod. Over the last 2 weeks, Nathan gave me the chance to prove whether I was capable of seeing people and problems clearly, instead of just efficiently. I flew out personally to save a relationship with a client we'd been failing for 6 months without knowing it. I ran a crisis response during the Denton fire without hiding behind committees or press releases. Both of those things happened because someone finally held up a mirror I badly needed, and I want to be honest that it was uncomfortable and necessary, and something I hope I never need again, because I hope I've actually learned it this time, not just survived it. She turned toward Nathan. I asked him to be here today, not to speak for me, but because I think you all deserve to hear directly from the person who could have fired me on the spot and chose something harder instead. Nathan stepped forward, unhurried, hands in his jacket pockets. I'm not going to give a long speech, he said. I've never been comfortable with those, which some of you already know from watching me try to avoid them for 20 years around here. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the crowd, recognition from the long-time employees who remembered him. What I will say is this. I built the system that runs a good part of this company's operations from a desk 2 floors below this one, and nobody up top knew my name for most of that time. I liked it that way. I've never needed to be recognized to know the value of what I was doing. He glanced toward Diane. But recognition matters for a different reason, not for the person receiving it, but for everyone watching what gets recognized. If a company only rewards the people who look successful walking into a room, it teaches everyone else that quiet, steady work doesn't count. Diane's willingness to say all of this out loud, in front of every one of you, instead of quietly hoping the story faded, That's exactly the kind of thing this company should reward. Not because it undoes the lobby. Because it's harder, and rarer, and more useful than the apology alone. He turned back to the crowd. I have one more thing to say, and then I'll let this be Diane's moment, not mine. Somewhere in this room today is someone who's been flagging a problem that hasn't been fixed yet. An account slipping, a process breaking, something that isn't in anyone's report because nobody's asked. I want that person to know, from today forward, that changes. Not because I'm demanding it. Because Diane's already proven, over the last 2 weeks, that she's the kind of leader who'll actually listen when you say it. The applause that followed wasn't loud in the way a celebration is loud. It was steadier than that, hundreds of people clapping not for a victory lap, but for an honesty they rarely got to witness from the people above them, the kind that made the whole building feel, for the first time in longer than most of them could remember, like it was actually being run by people who saw them. Near the back, Ozzy leaned toward the younger dock worker beside him. 22 years, he said, and I've never seen a CEO stand up there and say she was wrong like that. Not once. You think it sticks? The younger worker asked. Ozzy considered the question. I think it sticks if somebody keeps checking. That's the part that usually doesn't happen. He glanced toward the front, where Nathan was quietly stepping back to let Diane close out the meeting on her own. But I get the feeling somebody's going to check. 6 months later, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, Callaway Freight Group held its annual company gathering in the same atrium where the town hall had taken place. String lights strung between the support columns, folding tables loaded with food from a dozen local restaurants. Diane had insisted on hiring instead of a catering company, because she wanted the evening to feel like it belonged to the building's actual community, not a performance of one. Diane found Nathan near the edge of the gathering, holding a paper plate he hadn't touched, watching the crowd with the same quiet attentiveness he brought to everything. Holbrook renewed their contract this morning, she told him. Full 3-year term. Curtis Bell told me it was the fastest renewal decision he's made in a decade. That's not luck, Nathan said. That's Grace's daily check-ins for 6 straight months, and you showing up in person exactly when you said you would. Trust doesn't rebuild itself. Somebody has to keep choosing to earn it. Denton's fully operational again, Diane added. Ahead of the projected timeline, actually. And the new escalation process Grace built, the one where warehouse floor concerns get a direct line to operations leadership instead of sitting in an inbox, it's already flagged and fixed 4 issues that would have become crises a year ago. Nathan nodded slowly, something close to satisfaction crossing his face, though he never let it fully show, not out of coldness, Diane had learned, but out of the same instinct that had kept him quiet about his own history on the dock floor for 20 years. Some people simply didn't need the credit to know the work mattered. Can I ask you something? Diane said. That morning in the lobby, did you ever consider just walking away? Finding another way in, avoiding the whole moment? Nathan thought about the question honestly. For about 10 seconds, he admitted. It would have been easier. But I've spent a lot of years being underestimated in lobbies like that one, and most of the time, nothing came of it. The moment just passed, and everyone moved on unaware of what they'd revealed about themselves. This time, I had the power to make it mean something. I decided to use it. Not to punish me. No, Nathan said. To see if you were someone worth the company's future. And to see, honestly, whether you were someone worth trusting when nobody was watching you closely enough to force the question. Later that evening, after most of the crowd had thinned, Nathan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small brass wrench keychain he'd carried since Claire gave it to him decades earlier, along with the folded paper, softened now at the creases from months of being carried, where Ethan had drawn 2 people shaking hands under a crooked sun. He held both out to Diane. I want you to have something, he said. Not the wrench, that stays with me. But I want to tell you what it means, because I think you've earned the context. He explained it briefly. Claire, the promotion off the dock floor, the reminder to never forget where his hands had come from even once he was working behind a desk. Why tell me this now? Diane asked. Because 6 months ago, I don't think you would have understood why it mattered, Nathan said. I think you would have heard sentimental keychain and moved on to the next agenda item. Today, I think you'd understand exactly why some things matter more than what they're worth. Diane looked at the small brass wrench in his open palm, understanding, more clearly than any spreadsheet could have taught her, the distance this company, and she herself, had traveled in half a year. For what it's worth, she said, I think about that lobby every single day. Not with shame anymore. With gratitude. Strange as that sounds. It's the most useful 2 seconds of my entire career, even though it's the 2 seconds I'm least proud of. That's usually how the important lessons work, Nathan said. They rarely arrive wrapped the way we'd choose. That night, driving home, Nathan called Ethan on speakerphone, something he did most evenings on the commute back. How was the party? Ethan asked. Good, Nathan said. Diane asked about your drawing. The one with the handshake. Did you tell her I made it? I did, Nathan said. I told her it's the reason I carry it in my pocket most days. There was a proud silence on the other end of the line. Did she like it? I think it might be the thing she remembers longest about tonight, Nathan said honestly. Dad, Ethan said, after a moment, do you think she's a nice person now? Like, actually nice, not just pretending because she got in trouble. Nathan considered the question the way he considered most things Ethan asked him, carefully and honestly, refusing to give his son an easier answer than the true one. I think she's someone who found out she was capable of a mistake she didn't know she was making, he said. And instead of hiding from it, she spent 6 months proving, out loud, in front of everyone who watched her make it, that she could be better than that mistake. I don't think there's a nicer thing a person can do than that, honestly. Nice is easy when nobody's testing you. What she did was harder than nice. Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing that the way he processed most of his father's harder answers, turning it over, keeping the shape of it even if the full meaning would take years to settle. I'm glad you didn't just leave, he said finally. That morning. When she pointed you to the other door. Me too, Nathan said, pulling into the driveway, the porch light already on, the way it always was, because some habits from raising a child alone never really left, even on the nights that turned out easier than most. Inside the quiet company that neither the loading dock nor the boardroom ever fully saw, something had shifted that would outlast both of them. A warehouse worker named Ozzy who now had a direct line to operations leadership he'd never had before. A client named Curtis Bell who trusted a promise because someone had kept it exactly as stated. A young account manager named Grace Liu who no longer wondered whether her warnings would sit unread in an inbox for 11 days. None of them had been in that lobby. None of them ever needed to know the exact words exchanged there. But the ripple of it had reached them anyway, the way real change always does, not through the headline moment itself, but through everything a person chooses to become in the quiet months after being shown, clearly and without cruelty, exactly who they'd almost failed to see.